The turnaround that Kurt Cignetti is captaining is unbelievable. Mario Cristobal has become fond of saying, stop saying the Canes are back, we're here. I think he's absolutely right. They dominated Texas Tech last week, and it was because of the Oregon defense. Frankly, that Oregon's offense scored so many points. All four of the coaches that are currently in the playoffs are former Nick Saban assistants. That says a lot about Nick Saban's impact on college football, and it goes beyond the X's and O's.
Welcome to the show. The college football semifinals for the playoffs are this week, starting Thursday with the Fiesta Bowl. Ole Miss against Miami. Miami comes into the game as a 3.5-point favorite. This is a 7:30 p.m. Eastern kickoff on ESPN. Yeah, just to start with this game, Ole Miss's offense, coming off a really hot game against Georgia. Trinidad Chambliss is an elite quarterback. Chambliss has passed for 3,600 yards this year, which is sixth most in the country, and Chambliss only threw 3 interceptions all year for this Ole Miss team. This offense averages 500 total yards per game, which is second most in the country. They also average 315 passing yards per game, which is third best in the country. Kawan Lacey's having an incredible season this year. Lacey ran for 1,400 yards, third most in the country, and rushed for 23 touchdowns this year, which is second most in the country. Lacey has 8 straight games with a rushing touchdown coming into this Fiesta Bowl matchup, and he only had 1 game without a touchdown this season. One key matchup to note for this Ole Miss offense is the Ole Miss offensive line went into that Georgia game and didn't allow 1 sack. That is going to be key against this Miami defensive line. The Ole Miss offense heads into this game rolling. How does this offense match up against this elite Miami defense?
Well, what a matchup we start off with, Nick. This is going to be really interesting. You nailed it. The key matchup is the Ole Miss offensive line against Miami's relentless pass rush. They were just on fire against Ohio State. They didn't need to bring backers because their edge rushers, Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain, they were just putting pressure on every play. Every play, each of them. Mesidor had 2 sacks. Bain had a sack. They were in the backfield all night and just totally threw Ohio State's offense into disarray. So I think if Ole Miss can hold these guys off enough, Chambliss is athletic enough and much more athletic than Julian Sayin. Something can happen positively for Mississippi, but that's the key right there. Miami's defense, I can't say enough about them. Jacoby Thomas had 8 tackles from his safety spot. Coming up and supporting the run. Their interior line, led by Marquise Lightfoot, kept Ohio State's pretty weak running game off balance all night. They couldn't get anything going. And so, it was just a feeding frenzy in there for Miami's defense. Do I think that's going to happen again? Possibly. Miami's D is just different right now. They can put pressure on the quarterback without a lot of scheme. That allows their linebackers to stay back. In the case of somebody like Trinidad Chambliss, he's going to need somebody to be actually mirroring him. And so I can see Miami being able to do that as long as their edge rushers are putting as much pressure on Chambliss as they did against Ohio State. What a matchup. I think on the flip side of that, and you can come in a little bit here, because Carson Beck can move just well enough to buy time in the pocket. He's not a running quarterback like Chambliss per se, although he did in a number of occasions against Ohio State get just enough to keep drives going and really show that leadership on the field that we were looking for. We said that Carson Beck was going to have to play a lot better against Ohio State than he did against Texas A&M, and he did. He managed the game very well. He didn't have any mistakes. 2 keys that are going to need to continue against Mississippi. I'm looking for Miami to squeak one out here. As great a story as I think Ole Miss is right now. And do I think that this is a lay down hand? No. I think Mississippi can easily win this game. And the 3.5 points seems right to me. Um, Effectively, either team can win. And so I'm just really looking forward as a fan to sitting back and watching these two teams go at it. Um, Mario Cristobal has become fond of saying, "Stop saying the Canes are back, we're here." I think he's absolutely right, and he's proving to be a terrific coach throughout these playoffs. I think it's interesting that all four of the coaches that are currently in the playoffs are former Nick Saban assistants. That says a lot about Nick Saban's impact on college football, and it goes beyond the X's and O's.
Yeah, this Ole Miss offense is going to have a tough matchup against this Miami defense. And just to touch on it, they have probably the best defensive line left in the whole college football playoff, led by Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor, both elite pass rushers. Bain has 8.5 sacks and 13 tackles for loss on the season. Mesidor has 10.5 sacks and 15 tackles for loss. And then you go to their secondary. Defensive back Keontae Scott has also been a huge piece of this defense. Scott has played a large role in the run game. He has 13 tackles for loss and 5 sacks as a defensive back. Scott also has 2 interceptions, both pick sixes. Also, defensive back Bryce Fitzgerald and Jacoby Thomas have combined for 11 interceptions this year. They'll look to hold it down in the secondary, but that Miami defense thrives when they create pressure on the quarterback. They have been able to do this all playoffs so far, but then we'll switch to the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned Carson Beck. He's going to have to play a really good game in this game, which played well enough to get it done in Ohio State. They have a seriously elite offensive line in college football overall. They've only allowed 15 sacks this season, and Pro Football Focus ranks them in the top 10 in both pass blocking and run blocking. Mark Fletcher is the motor of this offense. The run is what makes this offense tick. It allows Carson Beck to feed the ball to Malachi Toney. And speaking of Malachi Toney this season has 1,000 yards receiving on the year, and he has 8 touchdowns. How do you see this Ole Miss defense performing against this Miami offense?
The Ole Miss defense put a lot of pressure on Georgia, and I expect them to continue. They don't have quite the depth of talent on the edges that Miami has, but they have enough to disrupt Carson Beck. And so it's going to be, again, up to Carson Beck to buy some time in the pocket, which he's done in the last 2 games, much better in the last game than the first. And if he has time to see his receivers downfield, I think that he's going to do just enough to win this game. I do want to say one thing about Malachi Toney that really got overlooked, and I think that we need to watch out for this in this game, okay? Malachi Toney put the ball on the ground twice against Ohio State. Neither one was recovered by Ohio State. So they don't go as fumbles, but he did fumble. They're not fumbles lost. He fumbled against Texas A&M. No question, Malachi Toney is a playmaker, and he's got 1,000 yards on the season. He's proven that he can catch the ball and he can make spectacular catches. But if he puts the ball on the ground and it doesn't bounce his way like it did against the Buckeyes, that could be a key factor in this game. This game is going to be so close that any turnover or any miscue on either side in the kicking game could just get accentuated. And so let's watch and make sure that Malachi Toney does not put the ball on the ground. As far as Mark Fletcher, what a spectacular game he had in round 1 against Texas A&M. He was good enough against Ohio State because they were making plays. But Mark Fletcher has to run the ball better than he did against Ohio State. And the Canes in general have to run better than they did against Ohio State to beat Mississippi. Mississippi's rolling right now. They've got that little bit of an it factor that somewhere along the line, a team picks up during the playoffs, and they're going to be really hard to beat. You have to play fundamental football against them. They played outstanding when it came down to it at the end against Georgia's pretty decent offense. Georgia had a very good running game, and they didn't really get off the ball much against Ole Miss. So, that matchup between Mark Fletcher and Ole Miss defense is very key to who wins this game.
Yeah, and the Ole Miss defense comes off their biggest win of the year this year by beating Georgia in a revenge game, the SEC champion Georgia, that is. Then we'll talk a little bit about this Ole Miss defense with their key players. The defense is led by their two linebackers, Sontarian Perkins and TJ Daughtery. Daughtery leads the team in tackles and two forced fumbles. Perkins has 11 tackles for losses, 3 sacks, and an interception. Princewell Uman-Mielen is the leader of the Ole Miss run defense. He leads the team in both tackles for loss with 12 and sacks with 8. Ole Miss will need to stop the Miami run game. That is one of the keys for Miami's offense. Ole Miss needs to keep control of the game and stop the Miami run game, and most importantly, stop them on third downs. Who do you think comes out of this game and goes to the national championship?
Well, I'm going to go with Miami. I think when it comes down to it, this team has more talent on the defensive side, and I think that's what wins the game. But boy, it's really hard because when I look at fundamental football, Ole Miss does almost everything right. Now, how about Lucas Canaro? Having a kicker like that in college is, first of all, odd, and secondly, very valuable. We know Miami's got problems in the kicking game. They did overcome those against Ohio State, but they're still there. They haven't really addressed it. That could come back to haunt Miami. So that's the only thing I'm a little bit worried about. But all in all, I'm going with Miami in this game.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see Thursday night at 7:30 for that game. But moving on to the next game, it is a Big Ten rematch between Oregon and Indiana. Indiana comes into the game as a 3.5-point favorite. This game is Friday night at 7:30 on ESPN. But man, first let's talk about that Indiana defense. The Indiana defense is led by their three linebackers, Rolajah Hardy, Aiden Fisher, and Isaiah Jones. Hardy and Jones have combined for 15 sacks, Hardy having 8 and Jones having 7. Hardy and Jones also have 14 tackles for loss each, and Aiden Fisher also has 2 interceptions. The run game is top in the country for this defense. They only allow 10 points per game this year, and the run defense also only gives up less than 75 yards per game. Defensive ends Stephen Daly and Tyreek Tucker are both a big part of their run defense. Daly is third in the country in tackles for loss with 19, and Daly also has 5.5 sacks. Tyreek Tucker has 11.5 tackles for loss and 5.5 sacks this year. This defense has forced 17 interceptions this year, led by cornerback Lewis Moore, who has 6 of those. How do you see this defensive matchup going between this high-powered Oregon offense and this powerhouse defense in Indiana?
Well, again, what a matchup we have. The benefit we have here is that these two teams played earlier this season. And so when you look at the result of that game, Indiana won 30-20. Indiana's defense held up very well against Oregon in Oregon. So I expect them to do the same. This defense is rolling. Their defensive line is in the backfield a lot, and they have a lot of tackles for loss. Like Dante Moore has a bunch of weapons, but I think what happened last week was that Texas Tech's offense was just so overmatched by Oregon's defense that Oregon's offense had a lot more opportunities to score, and they did. I would have gone into last week saying Oregon's got a high-powered offense. I leave that a little questionable. Do I think that Dante Moore can win this game and he's got the talent around him to do it? I absolutely do. I don't expect it. I expect Indiana's defense to maintain the pressure that they've put on for the last really all season and to dominate up front enough for them to win this game.
Yeah, and the Oregon offense is coming off a big game where they scored 23 points against that elite Texas Tech defense that we were talking about. But you look at this Oregon offense. The Oregon offense has 3 running backs with more than 500 rushing yards this year. They average over 200 yards per game on the ground for this run game. Noah Whittington and Jordan Davison both split the majority of carries. Davison has 15 touchdowns on the ground this year. And then you go to Dante Moore, who is a top quarterback in the country, top 10 in the country in passing touchdowns, and he can avenge the first game against Indiana where he threw 2 interceptions in that game. All the Oregon receivers play a big role in their game plan, starting with Malik Benson, who leads the team in receiving yards, and then tight end Kenyon Sadiq, who leads the team in receiving touchdowns and catches. Jeremiah McClellan and DeCorian Moore also play a huge role on this Ducks offense. But then you look at this Oregon defense who shut out Texas Tech last week, and you start with linebacker Tatum Tuioti, who leads the team in tackles for loss with 16 and leads the team in sacks with 9.5. This defense shut down Texas Tech. They picked Baron Morton off twice, and they held Texas Tech to 78 yards on the ground. They also forced 4 turnovers in that game. How do you see this Oregon defense matching up against this Indiana offense for the second time?
Well, I think they match up really well. I think that Oregon has definitely proven that their defense is an elite defense. They're a top 10 defense almost across the board. They dominated Texas Tech last week, and it was because of the Oregon defense. Frankly, that Oregon's offense scored so many points because they kept giving the ball to the offense on the plus side of the field. Now, going into this game, I don't see Oregon holding Indiana's defense down the way they did against Texas Tech, but I do think that it's going to be won and lost on the line of scrimmage. Pat Coogan and that offensive line need to put together another great performance like they did in the Rose Bowl in order to carry this team across the finish line. Sure, Fernando Mendoza he's got the talent, he's got the maturity, he's got the receivers in Omar Cooper Jr. and Elijah Surratt down the field, but he needs time to be able to actually survey the field and get to his second and his third read. And so this is going to be a line of scrimmage game. Oregon's defensive line lived in the backfield against Texas Tech last week. So if they do that again, Oregon can easily walk out of there with a win. I don't expect this to be a very high scoring game. Indiana scored a lot of points last week against Alabama, but much of that was after I think Alabama's spirit was broken. They changed their quarterback. This is going to be a game that looks like the first game, probably even less points, because Oregon's defense right now is better than they were when they played Indiana the first time.
Yeah, and you mentioned this offensive line for Indiana is going to play a huge role in the success of their offense. The offensive line looked dominant, though, against Alabama. Center Pat Coogan, who you mentioned, won offensive MVP in the Rose Bowl against Alabama last week, and they dominated the trenches against that Alabama team. Then you go to the run game. Roman Hemby and Kalen Black combined for 188 yards in that game and 2 touchdowns. Hemby is having a 1,000-yard season this year, and Kalen Black has 900 yards. They are a true 1-2 punch for this Indiana offense. Then Fernando Mendoza comes into the game coming off a huge 3-touchdown game against Alabama. Mendoza led the country in passing touchdowns this year with 36. And then on the outside for Mendoza, wide receivers Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. lead the aerial attack for the Hoosiers. Surratt leads the Big Ten in receiving touchdowns with 13, and Omar Cooper led the team in receiving yards this year. Charlie Becker, one of the guys who hasn't been seen that much for this Indiana offense, he's been good for this offense recently, and he could play a huge role in their aerial attack. The Indiana offense will have to win the line of scrimmage in this game against that Oregon defensive front. Who do you see coming out of this game and advancing to the national championship?
I see this as a dogfight, and it's hard to pick a winner. I'm going to go with Indiana. I just think that they've got that certain thing going right now. The turnaround that Kurt Cignetti is captaining is unbelievable. These fans are excited. This team is good. They have the best quarterback in the country, and they have enough offense, in particular a run game, to get it done against Oregon. I'm taking Indiana.
The semifinals of the college football playoffs start this Thursday with Ole Miss against Miami at 7:30 and Friday night with a rematch between Oregon and Indiana at 7:30. Both are on ESPN. Watch the games and we'll be back to review for the national championship.